Woo!
Welcome to Night Talks, the University of Florida College of Journalism and Communications talk show produced by students for you. I'm Diana Rincon, a second-year student studying media production, technology, and management. Our guest today is Steve Orlando, a CJC graduate who reported for the Tampa Tribune. He's held several leadership roles with UF and is now the Associate Vice President for Communications and Spokesman for the University of Florida. Hi, Steve. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, Diana. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
As a UF alum with degrees in political science and journalism, what drew you to these fields, and how did your time as a student at UF prepare you?
Mine is a very indirect route to journalism. I did not set out to go into journalism, actually. My original career path was to be a naval aviator.
Oh.
So that's why I went into political science, and my concentration was in Soviet studies. I took 4 years of Russian language because this was during the 80s, during the Cold War, and that seemed like a logical thing to do.
Yeah.
I graduated, got to officer candidate school in Pensacola, and during my first physical, they told me my eyes weren't good enough to be a pilot.
Oh.
And you know, if you remember the original Top Gun, they said you can be a backseater, but you can't be the pilot. And I'm like, but things don't end well with Goose, so I don't want to be him. So, so I want to be Maverick. So I got out, had to sort of reset my career path. And my dad was in journalism, he was in television and newspapers. I enjoyed writing, so I decided, well, that seems like a logical thing, let's give that a try. And I ended up, long story short, I got married, came back here for post-baccalaureate work, working toward a second degree in journalism, and that's how I ended up here.
Wow, it's funny how everything works out.
It is, and ironically, my son, who's also a CJC graduate, he was a reporter and then ended up becoming a Navy pilot, which he is now.
Oh, wow.
So he got to do what I didn't get to do.
And as a student, what was the value in writing for the independent Florida Alligator?
Oh, the Alligator was just invaluable experience. I mean, anybody who has the opportunity to do it, I definitely recommend it. It's kind of a boot camp for journalism. You're thrown into the deep end of the pool and you either sink or swim, and you learn everything on the fly. I'll give you an example. So when I was a reporter at the Alligator, a Soviet journalist named Vladimir Posner was coming to campus to speak. And, well, Soviet propagandist, actually. But because of my interest in Russian and Soviet studies, I volunteered to go cover him. And my editor said, that's fine, but you'll have to write the story that night. Because at the time, the Alligator was 5 days a week, which made it effectively a daily newspaper. So they said, go to the speech, but you have to cover it that night and write the story. Well, I had never done that before, so I was like, well, okay, I'll give it a try. So I'm sitting there after the speech. I'm sitting down in the newsroom at the computer trying to organize my thoughts and having a hard time getting started and trying different leads. And the editor at the time was a guy named John Nagy, who always dressed in dress slacks, wingtip shoes, suspenders, and a tie. If you can picture that in the Alligator newsroom. So I'm sitting there at the computer, and all of a sudden I noticed this pair of wingtip shoes on the desk next to me. John Nagy was standing on the desk with his hands on his hips, looking down at me going, how's your story coming? No pressure. So I organized my thoughts very quickly.
Yeah, I bet.
So it was a great experience.
And did your background in the Soviet studies help you at all with that specific report that you did?
It did, actually, because I sort of understood the fact that he was very smooth. He was raised in the United States, so he spoke flawless English, which made him seem very credible to American audiences while he's delivering the Soviet propaganda. Mm-hmm. So if you understand that and sort of see through that, what he's really up to, that sort of helps you frame the story better.
Oh, okay. And after graduating, you became a reporter for the Tampa Tribune. Tell us about this newspaper and how you got your start there.
Yeah, so the Tampa Tribune at the time was, of course, the major daily newspaper in Tampa. Its main competition was what was then the St. Petersburg Times, now the Tampa Bay Times. I got there because when I was doing my semester of post-baccalaureate work at here at the CJC, applied for an internship for the spring semester. And my reporting instructor, Jean Chance, she connected me with the Tampa Tribune. She knew one of the editors there, and she suggested you should go ahead and apply for it, which I got it. About 6 weeks into the internship, they liked my work and they hired me full-time right out of the internship. So I never really, I mean, I guess you get an A if you get a full-time job out of an internship. So that worked out well. But yeah, so I never went back and finished my second degree or my second bachelor's in journalism. Ultimately, I ended up coming back for a master's in mass communication though.
So you just went straight to job right after?
Went straight to job, yeah.
What was your beat at the Tampa Tribune, and what were the biggest challenges to reporting at that time?
Yeah, so at that time, I mean, the 80s were kind of one of the golden eras of newspaper journalism, you know. Everybody was flush with money and everybody was competitive, and it was a great time to be in the business. So at that time, the Tribune had bureaus from Gainesville all the way down to Miami, all over the state. And so I worked in the Citrus County Bureau. So this was a retirement community of 100,000 people. There were 4 daily newspapers competing there. The Tribune, the St. Pete Times, the Citrus County Chronicle, and the Ocala Star-Banner. So every day you'd come into the newsroom, there's all 4 front pages laid out, see who got beat on what stories and all of this, and it was great. So I covered a variety of different things, mostly the police beat, but also city government, county government, school boards, feature writing. It was a great experience.
And how was writing the police beats? I feel like those are like super cool and like high action.
Oh yeah, they were. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, even in small communities like that, there's a lot of action in the police beat. So I covered both Citrus and Sumter counties. And of course, Sumter County, you may know Wildwood, where the Florida Turnpike comes through and joins I-75. Well, at that time, there was a lot of drug trafficking going on I-75. So they had set up sort of an operation where they would look for cars, this is the Sumter County Sheriff's Office, would look for cars with like a burned out taillight or a tag light and pull them over, and as often as not they were drug mules. So they'd walk the dog around the car, it would alert, they'd pull out a bunch of cocaine. Wow. So there was a lot of, it was a really interesting beat.
Yeah, the 80s.
It was, yes, the rock and roll 80s. Yeah.
In 1996, you became news desk editor and senior writer for UF News and Public Affairs. What drew you back to Gainesville, and what was your focus in this role?
Yeah, so by the mid-90s, this is when the beginning of the web started, and you know, newspapers were sort of dipping their toes and going online, but the thinking at that time, they were kind of arrogant, quite frankly. This is just an experiment. Nothing will ever replace the print product, because that's where all the revenue is, the big display ads, all that. Nothing will ever replace that. Bad bet. So they never built a good business model at that time to sort of prepare themselves. But you know, but the revenue started falling, and the Tribune started closing bureaus, and you could see the writing on the wall. And by that time, I had 2 young children, and you know, being a reporter, you're working nights, you're working weekends and holidays, and I didn't want to miss my kids growing up. So an opening came up here in what was then known as News and Public Affairs, and I applied for it, and I got the job. And
did your experience with the Tampa Tribune translate well to writing for UF?
It did, actually, because in that job, they really wanted to hire former reporters, because you're writing news releases, and we still to this day, we write our news releases very much like journalistic style. You know, we follow AP style, we do the inverted pyramid and all that to make it so that when it goes to journalists, they don't have to try to figure out what it's about. They recognize it as a journalistic product and they know what they're dealing with. But the other thing that, you know, being at the Tribune prepared me for was being a journalist in general. Is it teaches you to think quickly on your feet, to be resourceful, to be resilient, to organize thoughts quickly on the fly, on deadline, and it teaches you really valuable communication skills.
Yes. And between 2004 and 2020, you also adjunct instructed for UF's College of Journalism and Communications. What did you enjoy most about teaching these students?
Well, that was just a wonderful experience. Yeah, I did that for, I think altogether about 15 years. I taught reporting lab for quite a few years. I did magazine feature writing, and then at the end I did a large mass media course. But I think the part I like most about it is just being around really energetic, smart young people who have a focus, and they have ideals, and they're excited about what they're doing. And I mean, it's infectious, contagious, that excitement.
Yeah, and did you feel like any nostalgia, like watching these students grow, like being a UF alum?
Yes, I actually taught reporting in some of the same places, one of the same rooms where I took reporting as a student. The main difference was I took it on a typewriter. Yeah. So it's much better to do it on a computer because you don't have to rip it out and start all over again. But yeah, I mean, it helped because I knew what they were experiencing. I knew the sort of the anxiety of taking reporting, because not many people like to take reporting, but it's a great experience, you know.
Yeah, it's very useful.
Yeah.
And what was one of the major takeaways that you would try to leave these students while you were teaching?
Yeah, well, with reporting class, it was just, you know, don't give up.
Yes.
It's hard. Don't give up. Don't take no for an answer. Be prepared to pivot as circumstances change, because that's a lot of what reporting is. You got to be ready for unexpected things, and you got to be ready to roll with the punches.
And in 2010, you became UF Senior Director for Media Relations. What type of media responsibilities did this entail?
So when I first came here as news desk editor and senior writer, I was doing a lot more writing, and I was kind of like an air traffic controller for news releases all over the university, just trying to keep them scheduled and coordinated and all of that sort of stuff. It was a lot of that, but it was more managerial experience, and it was around that time I started dealing more with senior university leadership, like deans and cabinet members and even the president at that point. So that's probably the biggest piece that changed.
And was it hard, like switching from writer to this new managerial position?
Yeah, it was, because I really didn't, I wasn't prepared for it. I never imagined myself in a role like that. I mean, it's not like you set out, or at least I didn't set out to say, I'm going to be a senior leader one day. Yeah. I was kind of happy just being at a certain level and keeping my head down. Mm-hmm. But the more I got to work with some of the senior leadership, the more I realized this is a good place to be. I would like to be here someday.
In 2015, you became the UF's National Media Strategist. How were you able to work with UF researchers to elevate their stories in national and international media?
Yeah, so UF is one of the things that makes UF a really great place is we have so many incredibly talented faculty members here, researchers from all over the world that are doing this remarkable research. So there's so many good stories to tell about it. You know, I think now we have like 6,600 faculty, so they're all doing great stuff, but the trick is to figure out, look at it through a journalist's eyes and say, well, what's interesting? What research is going to capture attention? You know, so it was working with faculty to, when you see, okay, you've just published this really interesting journal article, and I think this is going to get national media attention. Mm-hmm. Let's work together on doing that. And, you know, it's identifying faculty who are interested in that, because not everybody is. And then we would also, for those who hadn't had experience working with the media, we do training to help them prepare to be on camera and, you know, how to respond to questions and things like that. And I would say that it's not for every faculty member, but there are so many faculty members that are really good at it, and that's important to relay that message to the public, that science matters, and your tax dollars are being used for good purposes, and this is work that will help change the world.
Yeah. And what are key strategies for effectively communicating these complex research to audiences? Yeah,
so the biggest thing is to put it in layperson's language,
yeah.
which is really challenging for scientists and researchers sometimes, because like any profession, they have their own language. Mm-hmm. But you have to be able to do it in sort of Bill Nye the Science Guy way,
yeah.
to make it entertaining and interesting so that people get it, because communication isn't communication if it's not being received, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to help people understand what you're talking about, understand why it's important to them.
So in these situations, like particularly, you have to think about the audience's eyes, not so much through the journalist's eyes.
That's correct.
Yeah. Can you give us an example of any of these stories that you've put on the bigger stage?
Yeah, so well, there's a couple. One that comes to mind was not too long ago, a few years ago, we had a researcher who works in the computer-brain interface, and he had developed a way to create brain-controlled drones.
Oh.
So the person wears special headgear, and their thoughts control where the drone is going, which is a fascinating story. Yeah. And so when I heard about it, I was like, this is going to be a big deal. So long story short, we worked with him. He was already kind of a natural, but to help him, help him show how this could be useful someday in all kinds of applications in medicine, in helping people with disabilities, all those kind of things. And then they set up a brain drone race.
Wow.
Over in the Florida gym. They had students, and they each were controlling drones racing up and down the basketball court. And so we worked with the Associated Press to give them an exclusive on it. We set up cameras and videos, And that story just got worldwide coverage.
Yeah, I bet it did. That's
Yeah.
super cool.
Yeah.
And you've collaborated with many UF entities such as UF Health and the University Athletic Association. How important is teamwork and cross-departmental collaboration in communications?
Yeah, so UF, as you know, is an enormous place.
Yeah.
You know, we have 6,600 faculty, we have 61,000 students, it's, 1,000 acres, it's a $10 billion enterprise. We have, depending on which number you go by, we have anywhere from 300 to 400 communicators and marketers on campus. So you can imagine if everybody's doing their own thing, that's not going to be useful to the university. So it's important to get everybody sort of on the same page to understand what the university's strategic goals are, what we want to communicate about ourselves as an institution, and then to help everybody work toward that goal, to contribute to it. And really, I think the most important piece of that is really just building relationships with folks.
And teamwork is a dream work.
Teamwork makes the dream work, you got it.
In 2019, you became the Assistant Vice President for Communications, followed by Associate Vice President in 2022. What do you oversee in these leadership roles?
Yeah, so now I oversee the communication side of our operation. Lot less, well, I mean, there's a daily managerial piece to that, just making sure everything's running smoothly in the office and people are working together and smoothing out problems, making sure people have what they need to do. I mean, that's really a big piece of a leadership role, is making sure that your team has everything they need to do the jobs they need to.
Yeah. And how has the rise of digital media and social platforms and now artificial intelligence affected public relations and university branding?
It's really complicated
Yeah,
now.
I bet.
I mean, in the 28 years I've been here, so when I got here, we were faxing news releases, email was brand new. There was still an understanding, I think, that there was what we now call the legacy media, the traditional outlets like the networks, CNN, NBC, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and even then, most people trusted those sources. The biggest change now is that there's been such a fragmentation of the media landscape, and there are so many other places where people can get their information now, and there's been so much misinformation introduced into the equation that our biggest challenge is to sort of counteract that and to present ourselves as a reliable, trustworthy source of information.
And what does that entail? Like, what do you do to prove to these people that you guys are not a misinformation site? Yeah,
so I think it's kind of following just old-fashioned journalistic standards, making sure that our stories are absolutely 100% correct. We do something that you wouldn't do in journalism. We make sure our sources look over our stories before they're posted. That's something you don't normally do in journalism, but we have to, because we absolutely have to be right. Yeah. And presenting it in a very non-sensationalistic way, just here are the facts, here's the information. I mean, you want to get people interested in it, but you don't want to overpromise and underdeliver.
So just straight to the point, basically.
Yep. That's it.
As someone who has overseen UF crisis management efforts, what advice would you give to students on effectively communicating during high-pressure situations, like, for example, a hurricane?
Yeah. Probably the single most important thing in a crisis situation is to communicate quickly, clearly, and often. Mm-hmm. Because in crisis situations, that's one of the first victims is accurate information, and people are starved for information in those kind of situations. And if there's a vacuum of information, people are quick to fill it with rumors and misinformation. So you want to get ahead of that.
And how did you do that? Like, for example, we've already had 2 hurricanes and we've had to cancel class. How was that experience?
We have honestly, we have a wonderful team in our office, and they are all professionals to the core. We prepare for this, we have a plan. Unfortunately, this year we've gotten a lot of practice at using that plan, but because it's kind of a well-oiled machine now, everybody we know what to do, and everybody knows what their role is, and everybody just falls right into the routine and does what they need to do.
And having held multiple leadership roles, what are key qualities that have helped you succeed in these positions?
Well, again, I didn't really set out to do this, so I kind of have to stop and think about that. I think first and foremost is to make sure that for your team, again, that they know that you're there to advocate for them and to help clear obstacles and get them what they need to do their job and not to get in their way. It's also, there's managing down, there's managing up. It's also making sure that our office is represented well to senior leadership in the cabinet and president and the deans and places like that. And I think, you know, in any discipline or any industry, I think the people who are best in leadership are the best communicators. That's one of the things I know I look for when I hire people, and I think that's something that is universal. It doesn't matter if it's engineering, medicine, or agriculture, whatever. People who can communicate well and clearly and relate to other people are the ones who rise to the top.
Many students start stressing about their careers and finding their niche. How did you navigate your own career path, and what advice would you offer to students about finding the right career direction?
Yeah, well, again, it was a very indirect path to get here. It was totally, had, you know, to make a right turn and then a left turn and figure myself out. But I think that's probably really important for young people is it's okay if it takes a little while to figure out who you are and what you want to do. And whatever you pick now does not mean that's what you're going to be doing even 5 or 10 years from now, particularly now when there are so many new career paths developing and all this new technology is happening. So I guess that would be it, is be flexible, always be on the lookout for opportunities, be ready to go out and seize them when you see them, and don't take no for an answer. I mean, just a real quick example, when I decided on journalism after the Navy didn't work out, I was on a very short time frame. My fiance at that time, who's now my wife of 37 years, we decided in April that we were going to get married in August and I was going to come back to school. Okay, that's 4 months. In April, when I called down here to the CJC, they said, well, you've already missed the application deadline. We can't admit you for the fall. And I'm like, I don't have a plan B. I have to get in. Yeah. So I drove from Pensacola down here to Gainesville and walked into Weimer Hall and went to the dean's office. And I can't remember if I met with the dean at that time, Ralph Lowenstein, or if it was John Rosenrod, but one of them, I just knocked on the door and they said, what can I do for you? And I told them my situation and they were like, I said, I got to have this. Yeah. And they went, okay, we'll give you a chance.
Wow.
So that's what I mean by be flexible and don't take no for an answer.
Yeah, and take initiative.
Take initiative, that's right.
So as journalism students and media students, we're taught that we have our audiences. For you specifically, what are your audiences that you're always looking to? Yeah,
that's a great question. We have so many audiences in what we do. We like to think that our first audience is the news media, which it is, but that's really kind of a conduit to our other audiences. And as the news media landscape has become more fragmented, we are almost becoming our own journalism source of information, right? So our audiences include everybody from the news media to, depending on what it is we're communicating, to students, faculty, and staff, alumni, legislators, policymakers in Tallahassee and Washington, donors and potential donors, potential employees. You know, if there's faculty members out there we're trying to recruit, we want to highlight ourselves in a positive way, potential students. So it really runs quite a wide gamut.
Can you tell us any stories that you have, like with high pressure situations and crises that you've dealt with?
Sure, lots of those. So, have you ever heard the expression "Don't tase me, bro"? No. Never heard that? Is anybody else? Okay.
Oh, I'm the only one.
So, "Don't tase me, bro" started here at the University of Florida. Mm-hmm. This was in, I think, 2007. John Kerry, who had been a presidential candidate, former White House cabinet official, came to campus to speak. And John Kerry is not known as a fiery individual, so I figured it'll be fine. There's no reason that I need to be there for that speech. It was in university auditorium. So I'm sitting in my office, and I get a call from the chief of police, Linda Stump, and she said, I'm at the John Kerry speech. We just tased a guy, and there are 6 cameras in the room. You need to come over here right now. I'm like, oh, okay. So I go over there, and before I even get to the police chief, one of the camera people I knew from one of the local TV stations came over, and she had a big smile on her face, and she said, you want to see it? Sure. And she shows it to me on her viewfinder, and there it was. Our police officers are tasing a student who's yelling on the ground in university auditorium. I'm like, That's not going to end well. Long story short, that blew up because of that little snippet of information. This was our first experience with a viral video. We didn't know what that was. I figured, well, we got time in the news cycle, we can figure this out. Nope. It went viral, and suddenly we were getting phone calls and emails from all over the world calling our police horrible names and how we were suppressing free speech and how brutal it was. I think the university got something like 15,000 emails in a week.
Wow.
Because of that. So we went over to there was going to be, the next day about 300 protesters showed up at the police department, and the president's chief of staff says, come with me, we need to get over there right now. So I'm out there in front of the police department talking to this group of 300 protesters, and I made the mistake of saying, the president is going to have a news conference at Emerson Hall in about 30 minutes, I have to go. And 300 protesters turned around and headed for Emerson Hall. So now I am at Emerson Hall, I'm trying to beat them there. I'm at the top of the stairs because the news conference is going to be on the second floor. And I'm trying to pick out the reporters I know and allow them through, and to tell the protesters, I'm sorry, you have to stay down here. One protester, she said, well, I'm actually a journalist working for CNN. I said, but you're a protester. She said, but I'm covering this for CNN. I said, okay, you can come in as long as you put your protester hat downstairs and come in as a journalist. So it was a big learning experience. Yeah. Long story short, the way it turned out, we learned many months later, this guy, he had been tased because he wouldn't stop talking, he wouldn't stop asking questions, he was told to sit down, he was becoming disruptive, and then he started getting physical and the police tased him. Turned out it was all a stunt. He had done it as a publicity stunt.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so.
A publicity stunt for what? Like, what was he trying to achieve with that?
He just wanted attention.
Yeah.
Again, this is the beginning of viral videos. So he was going to get his place of fame by getting this viral video, which he accomplished. And here we are, still talking about him. So
that is a crazy story.
It was an experience.
Wow. Well, thank you for your insights, Steve. So glad we got to hear about your story from Navy pilot to Associate Vice President. And thank you to our viewers for joining us. Until next time, good night.